Hey guys, Jim here. Welcome back to our Vascular Sonography Registry review. Let's keep rocking this test. Question 76. What type of spectral waveform is this, and what does it demonstrate? A. Bunny ears and subclavian still. B. Yin-yang and true aneurysm. C. To and fro and false aneurysm. Or is it D. Tardus parvus and proximal stenosis? The answer is C. To and fro and false aneurysm or pseudoaneurysm. Question 77. Drag and drop the letter X on the artifact with high attenuation. So where'd you put this X on your image? The high attenuation is referring to the shadowing in the image, which is right here. So you'll just put your X right there. Question 78. What causes blue toe syndrome? A. Aneurysm. B. Capillary spasm. C. Chronic inflammation. Or D. Embolus. The answer is D. Embolus. Question 79. Click in the area where a left subclavian stele would be located. So where would you click on this image? The answer is right in this region here. This is the proximal subclavian artery. So I'll just place my little marker right there. This is the vertebral artery in which you'll have retrograde flow coming down into the subclavian artery, feeding or helping perfuse the left arm. Question 80. What does this ultrasound demonstrate? A. May-Thurner syndrome. B. Dunbar syndrome. C. Budd-Chiari syndrome. Or D. Median arcuate ligament syndrome. The answer is A. May-Thurner syndrome. And this ultrasound shows a compression of the left iliac vein right here by the right iliac artery. So this is right iliac artery compressing the left iliac vein. And this is the IVC. Question 81. What causes trash foot syndrome? A. Compression of vasculature. B. Embolus. C. Deep vein thrombosis. Or D. Cold weather. The answer is B, embolus. And trash foot syndrome is just another fancy name for blue toe syndrome. Question 82. What does this equation calculate? A, renal aortic ratio. B, resistive index or RI. C, percentage area reduction. Or D, end diastolic ratio or EDR. The answer is C, percentage area reduction. So just memorize this equation for your boards. Question 83. What does this ultrasound demonstrate? A, Paget-Schroeder syndrome. B, Budd-Chiari syndrome. C, renal vein entrapment syndrome. Or D, Dunbar syndrome. The answer is C, renal vein entrapment syndrome, also known as nutcracker syndrome. Question 84. Which artery travels superiorly along the pancreas? A, celiac artery. B, superior mesenteric artery. C, superior pancreatico-duodenal artery. Or D, gastroduodenal artery. The answer is A, celiac artery. Also, splenic artery is an acceptable answer. The reason why gastroduodenal artery isn't correct is because this artery travels anteriorly to the pancreas. Question 85. Where is the stenosis in relation to the spectral Doppler waveform? A, proximal. B, at the sample volume location. C, distal. Or D, there is no stenosis. The answer is A, proximal. This spectral Doppler represents a waveform called tardus parvis, meaning that the stenosis is proximally. This waveform was taken distally from the stenosis. That means, according to this color map and the steering direction of this color box, the blood flow is left to right. So the stenosis will be over here or up towards the head. Over here, this is down towards the legs. Question 86. Which of the following is separated when a tourniquet is applied to the greater saphenous vein? A, femoral vein. B, profunda vein. C, Leonardo's vein. Or D, Giacomini vein. The answer is D, Giacomini vein. Question 87. Which is an emboli that would explain a retinal eye occlusion? A, Holland-Horst plaque, B, occipital vein blood clot, C, blue eye syndrome, or D, homonymous hemianopia. The answer is A, Holland-Horst plaque. Question 88. How would you fix the spectral Doppler waveform to reduce the spectral broadening? A, reduce sample gate, B, increase PRF, C, increase angle of incidence, or D, invert color map. The answer is A, reduce sample gate. You can see that the sample gate is extended way too wide, even beyond the carotid artery. So this needs to be reduced, and this will reduce your spectral broadening. Question 89. Which of the following is separated when a tourniquet is applied to the greater saphenous vein? A, deep veins, B, superficial veins, C, venules, or D, capillaries? The answer is B, the superficial veins. By applying this tourniquet to the greater saphenous, this will close off any flow from the superficial system and influencing the deep system. Question 90. Based on the arrows demonstrating the direction of blood flow, which side is the superficial venous system? A, B, or need more information? Now, regarding the direction of blood flow, this isn't something where we need a color box and a scale. I'm just simply saying that blood flow is moving from one area to another. Based on this image, the superficial system is A and B is the deep venous system because blood flow will move from superficial to deep. Question 91. Which of the following describes Budd-Chiari syndrome? A, recurring subclavian vein thrombosis, B, celiac artery stenosis during expiration, C, hepatic vein obstruction with hepatofugal portal vein flow, or D, compression of the subclavian vein by the clavicle and the first rib. The answer is C, hepatic vein obstruction with hepatofugal portal vein flow. Question 92. Which of the following is an abnormal RI? A, 0.9, B, 0.69, C, 0.5, or D, 0.359? The answer is A, 0.9. RI stands for resistive index, and any number greater than 0.8 is abnormal, and any number less than 0.8 is normal. Question 93. Click in the area where a right subclavian stele would be located. So where would you click on this image? Now, don't make the mistake into thinking that a right subclavian stele is right here, because this is the innominate artery or the brachiocephalic artery. Your right subclavian artery starts right here. This is your right common carotid artery, left common carotid artery, left vertebral artery, and left subclavian artery. So a right subclavian stele would be right here. The right vertebral artery isn't in view, but it would be right over here. Question 94. Which is the correct equation for the resistive index? A, B, C, or D? The answer is B. Question 95. Which of the following causes an IVC occlusion? A, hiatal hernia, B, May-Thurner syndrome, C, left renal tumor, or D, nutcracker syndrome? The answer is C, left renal tumor. Question 96. How do you measure the acceleration time? A, place caliper where gradient starts and the other caliper on the first peak of the early systolic peak. B, place caliper on the first peak of the early systolic peak and the other caliper on the lowest diastolic level. C, place caliper where gradient starts and the other caliper on the lowest diastolic level. Or is it D, place caliper on the lowest diastolic level and place the other caliper on the next waveform's highest peak? The answer is A, place caliper where gradient starts and the other caliper on the first peak of the early systolic peak. Question 97. Which is an abnormal penile brachial index? A, 3.5, B, 1.0, C, 0.5, or D, 0.85? The answer is C, 0.5. Question 98. What's the issue regarding this ultrasound image and spectral Doppler? A, hepatopedal flow. B, hepatofugal flow. C, map is inverted. Or D, Doppler angle is incorrect. The answer is B, hepatofugal flow or flow away from the liver, and this image represents Budd-Chiari syndrome. Question 99. Which type of plaque has a homogeneous ultrasound characteristic? A, fibrous plaque. B, calcification plaque. C, chronic plaque. Or D, thrombotic plaque. The answer is A, fibrous plaque. Question 100. Which artery supplies blood to the thigh? A, common femoral artery. B, femoral artery. C, lateral circumflex artery. Or D, profunda artery. The answer is C, lateral circumflex artery. Question 101. What is the arrow pointing to? A, vertebral artery occlusion. B, severe plaque. C, carotid body tumor. Or D, transverse process. The answer is D, transverse process. Question 102. How do you measure the resistive index? A, place caliper where gradient starts and the other caliper on the first peak of the early systolic peak. B, place caliper on the first peak of the early systolic peak and the other caliper on the lowest diastolic level. C, place caliper where gradient starts and the other caliper on the lowest diastolic level. Or is it D, place caliper on the early systolic peak and the other caliper on the lowest diastolic level? The answer is D, place caliper on the early systolic peak and the other caliper on the lowest diastolic level. Question 103. The vertebral artery will branch off the subclavian artery and will enter what transverse process first? AC1, BC2, CC5, or DC6? The answer is D, C6. Question 104. Which vein drains the thigh? A, greater saphenous vein. B, femoral vein. C, lateral circumflex vein. Or D, profunda vein. The answer is C, lateral circumflex vein. Question 105. What is the arrow pointing to? A, enhancement. B, plaque. C, shadowing. Or D, occlusion. The answer is C, shadowing. This shadowing is caused by the transverse process here. This is a highly attenuating structure because it's bone. Question 106. How do you fix spectral mirror artifacts? A, decrease wall filter. B, increase wall filter. C, decrease spectral gains. Or D, increase spectral gains. The answer is C, decrease spectral gains. Also, another acceptable answer would be decreasing your angle from 90 degrees. Question 107. Which describes the cross-sectional percent reduction? A, law of conservation of energy. B, law of conservation of matter. C, law of conservation of hemodynamics. Or is it D, law of conservation of mass? The answer is D, law of conservation of mass. Question 108. Which of the following describes the formula Q equals A times V? A, law of conservation of energy. B, law of conservation of matter. C, law of conservation of hemodynamics. Or is it D, law of conservation of mass? The answer is D, law of conservation of mass. Question 109. This image shows color Doppler in what vessel, demonstrating what type of flow? A, portal vein and hepatopedal. B, hepatic vein and hepatofugal. C, portal vein and hepatofugal. Or is it D, hepatic vein and hepatopedal? The answer is C, portal vein and hepatofugal. Question 110. What does this ultrasound demonstrate? A, mesenteric artery syndrome. B, nutcracker syndrome. C, Budd-Chiari syndrome? Or is it D, Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome? The answer is C, Budd-Chiari syndrome. And that concludes the 25 questions for this video. I will hurry and write 25 more questions and upload that video as fast as I can. If any of you have any questions about your upcoming vascular boards, feel free to email me at ultrasoundboardreview@gmail.com, or you can personally text or call at 435-922-1635. I'm Jim with ultrasoundboardreview.com. We'll see you next time.